Just will be a few moments. See, the best things for the people who wait. And there we have it. So if I can just clarify, if you give me a moment. Absolutely wonderful. Okay, so everybody, welcome to another tremendous guest on the Empower Hour show. This is episode 70. It's going to be with somebody who's very personally connected to myself and a really good friend, brother, and very, very, very able-bodied individual, Danny Sangha. And I shall introduce him shortly, but before I do so, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of our sponsors, which are Salam Radio here in Peterborough, myself, Sukhi, Wahiwala, your host, and also the international inspired tribe, people who are connected with us all over the world. There are thousands of you, of which I am forever indebted, and thank you so very much for listening to our live events. This evening, we're not going to let you down in any way. This is the episode 70 of the Empower Hour with Danny Sangha, an individual who's used to working at the highest level with super high ultra net worth individuals through the banking system, supporting bankers, JP Morgan, Barclays Wealth, all with IT infrastructures and compliancy. So he's the absolute, you could say, epitome of the highest level of congruent, conscious individual. And what he's done to change the worlds of others, once he's realized, which we'll get to in this particular episode, is he's now moved into another environment where he's helping all of these celebrities and high-end, high net worth individuals, sports personnels and personalities, actually find who they are as an individual, as a person, so that they can continue to achieve with deep-rooted values through his atomic method, which he has devised. A beautiful, we'll be touching it later on in the session, and he assists individuals to find, attract the inner self, get clear, so they can truly align themselves with confidence in their journey. So without further ado, welcome, Danny.
Thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. Thank you, Sukhi.
I hope you enjoyed it, because most people say, oh my God, that introduction is too big, but I'm always telling the truth. That's what we do here on the Empower Hour.
That was an amazing introduction. Thank you so much. And if you don't mind, Sukhi, I'll call you Baji as an elder brother figure that I see yourself as, with all due respect.
Truly, absolutely. If you call me Baji, that's absolutely fine. Just for anybody who's non-English to non-Punjabi speaking, Baji just basically means a brother and a respected space. But I'm also very happy for today. Please call me Sukhi. Feel comfortable. However it comes off your tongue, that's fine. Without further ado, we don't hang about here, I'm afraid. The Empower Hour is something very, very personal to our community, to the people who follow us, and we're not going to let them down today. I'm going to go straight to it, straight for the jugular, my friend. Where are you from, and how many are you one of, siblings-wise? What was your life like when you grew up?
Sure thing, Baji. Yeah, so home for us is here in Surrey, in the southeast of England, just a couple of miles north of Gatwick Airport. Siblings-wise, I'm the eldest of three. I've got a younger brother and sister. I'm being the eldest of them too.
Brilliant. So the question to yourself then, being the eldest, I just want to play a little game here. How does that leave you? Do you feel the oldest? And I know I've known you for long enough now as a younger brother to myself, and your abilities are superbly supercharged. My question to yourself is that, as an older brother, do you genuinely feel different? I know you wouldn't know any different, but most of our audience and most of our guests say, well, yeah, I'm the oldest brother. Last week we had another guest who said, I had a year between my brother and myself, and we were kind of very competitive physically. How was it like for you?
Good question. I think for me, because my sister is a lot younger than I am. She's the youngest of us, and she's nearly 10 years younger than me. So I've always felt significantly older and sort of the big brother. My brother is about 3 years younger than I am. So I think young enough that, you know, he was definitely a younger brother, and sort of not so young enough that we were still sort of aligned in terms of companionship and what have you as we were growing up together.
That's a really beautiful way of saying it, actually. You know, sometimes they say, you know, when a sibling, and I'm sure you'll be able to help the audience and think about this as well. A sibling is like a year or kind of 2 years apart. You tend to be very, very close in the sense of there seems to be a rivalry. But the moment you get by 3 years or 4 years, it starts becoming, oh no, that person's considerably older than myself. Is that right? Do you find that?
Yeah, I think it was that healthy balance of no rivalry existing between my brother and I, but at the same time we shared some common interest, real passion for cars is one of the key things for us as sort of
Yes.
boys growing up.
Yes,
So that was
I'm
a
on
big
your
one.
team on that one. I share that with my brother, my nephews, and my son as well.
Brilliant.
So I'm going to lead you to a conversation because this is really quite interesting. And I don't, you know, these aren't pre-planned questions. I'm going to ask you a simple question and put you on the spot a little bit. But so what is your favorite car then? Come on. You're a car fanatic. What would it be?
So my childhood one was always the Ferrari F40. That for me, we had a picture of it hung up and a Ferrari Testarossa as well. So the Ferraris were the ones for me. My brother had a sort of gifted Lamborghini Diablo, and so that kind of became his sort of one. It was like it was set for us because I got given the Ferrari picture as my present, and he got his as a Lamborghini. So it almost became sort of predefined for us which one I was going to sort of focus upon and what have you.
That is so cool, and do you know what? Honest truth, I can really connect with that. And with myself, I kind of you hit the F40, and the F40 was something that was very specific around the 1987, 89 sort of time frame, and ultimately it took the crown from a car that was the 959, which was the Porsche, which managed 197 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden, it jumped in with literally 8 months later by the F40, which is 201. So it kind of pipped it to the post again. Constant rivalry. For myself, it was always going to be one of three. I think I'm devout a Porsche man, and in specific a 911, because that was in fact it's kind of influenced by my brother at a very young age because he's 16 years my senior. His name is Bob Wahiwala, and when he was very early 20s, 21, 22, when he had his first 911, he did very well for himself within the family. And for me, it was always that idolization. So that's what brought me into cars. I really love it as well. So stimulation wise, what was your interest in life? Was it about cars? Was it other things as well when you were younger?
I think mainly for me growing up, so I kind of had quite a kind of responsible role within the household, being the eldest, even back when, it's just myself and my brother. I was the oldest, and coming from a sort of a relatively strict sort of setting, if you like, the playful side was limited and relatively restricted. But for me, a lot of my pastime was spent with a friend of mine across the street that I used to play with in my pastime. Sports, I was definitely into it, but my actual ability to get involved in it, focus for me was very much about studying. That seemed to be sort of the focus, and to some extent a pressure for me to do well academically. And when that's sort of achieved, that's when you then have time to play. That seemed to be a running theme for me when I was growing up.
And most definitely for anybody who does know Danny, and I'm hoping your family is supporting you in extended wise, and all of your friends and clients are also watching this with us as well, but he definitely exudes that air of what we classify as confidence, but also that nurturing. He tends to take looking after people. So it's a very, very honest attention there. Now, Danny, just a question. You said it was a very strict environment, and obviously a lot of focus, as a lot of our relationships and our growing up timeframes were through the 70s and 80s, and specific were really pushed around getting an education. How were you kind of like acceptant of that journey? Did you find it, were you sort of balancing what you wanted to do? Because you're a very sporty individual, very fit as well. Got gratitude. How did you manage to balance that in your life?
I think the sporting element actually came a little bit later on, sort of towards my early teens, actually, Baji, in that I had a couple of role model figures. My couple of uncles of mine who were very much into it. And encouraged me to sort of focus in on that as well. So the sort of physical side came a little bit sort of later on in my childhood, and earlier on than that, I think it was very much still about heavily focused on study and then just being responsible and helping out at home. That seemed to be very prevalent in sort of the much earlier formative years of my childhood.
And another question then that leads to is did you find in your early years when you were studying that, I mean, what was school life like? I mean, did you find any, were your classes, I mean, whereabouts are you actually from, and were your classes very, very mixed when it comes to cultural and ethnicity?
Yeah, certainly. So my hometown back then, it was Crawley. So I grew up in Crawley, and primary school very much, I think, it was very heavily sort of, typical back then in the 80s of, predominantly white background. There were only a few Asian origin children in the classrooms, I think. And even then, they were predominantly based on the demographics of Crawley, with the ethnic minorities, predominantly Muslim, and then followed by Hindus and then Sikhs. So Sikhs, we've always been a very small population in this area. So yeah, it's very much been that sort of minority group, even within a classroom. So I think I was the one only one during all of my primary school classes as an ethnic background child, versus the rest of what it would be 29 or 30 pupils in the class.
Wow, that kind of harks back to something similar to how I grew up, and I'm one of the first actual guests that I've had a similar sort of mix. So very much in the minority. Did you ever find any integration challenges, or was life, was it as accepted and as normal? Because I found it quite normal.
I think in the classroom environment, I almost sort of assimilated and just sort of, as it were, in amongst my peers. The Indian element never really was there. I almost sort of have a duality in my life. Back home, inside the home environment, it was, we spoke Punjabi at home, and everything culturally was very heavily sort of Punjabi and traditional in that sense. And it was only sort of in that school environment where then I became sort of exposed to completely sort of zero Punjabi-ness or anything culturally to that extent. So it's almost sort of having those two sort of worlds sort of segregated and distinctly separate throughout, really. Never really merged during my childhood years, apart from maybe towards secondary school, where there were more Asians and we sort of then sort of gravitated towards one another in terms of sort of having that common ground.
Now, do you know what? I'm just thinking, Danny, you said something really, really wonderful there, the duality of kind of leading two lives. Now, I just want to bring this point up to the audience so that everybody can understand this has got nothing to do with racial contention. That's not the intention. And normality is everybody's own journey is normal to them, right? So there's no right or wrong per se. But that really is interesting, because I can really relate to that, of being kind of very different at home as I was at school. Now, did you find any contention with managing that duality, of being kind of really principally English at school and being partially Punjabi, which is a northwest India state, is the home to a lot of us Punjabi Sikhs, and currently the center of attraction when it comes to India currently with the farmers strikes, but peace protests. But here's my question to yourself: did you ever find that there was any? Was it in flow? Was it natural? Did you find any contention there at all?
No, I think I was very shy, I guess, to kind of share, because I was the only person in my classroom who came from that background specifically, that it did become a little bit difficult to feel openly able to share, who I am, and what sort of being Punjabi was all about. Yeah, just very shy of just expressing myself in that respect. So yeah, just literally kept that kind of parked and sort of away, and sort of avoiding even having those conversations to expose a difference, if you like.
Yeah, that's really deep, and that's really wonderful to share, because we found this through the journey of our Empower Hour, and you're the 70th guest as well. That even whether we're ethnically attuned, for our background, and even the word ethnic with itself has got its own bias within itself. Is accepting the fact that there's a difference when we're all the same. But the reality is that even if it's a language barrier, but also the fact that it could be color, it could be creed, caste, etc. But there was also the fact that home and school life were very different. And to an extent, there's a mismatch here, isn't there, in life? So my question to yourself is that, does something like this follow through into adult life? I mean, even teenage life. Do we sometimes live a life of duality, in the sense of work, home, I suppose school, but more about social life at school and school classroom behavior? What do you think?
Yeah, I think over time it does become a little bit easier to integrate the two worlds. It's not so sort of prevalent in terms of having a duality in existence there. You certainly have this sort of switching mode and mindset when you walk into different environments, but in terms of that whole integration of what your cultural background is, and sort of, I think that as you grow and you start to expose yourself and get integrated with others as a wider community, then like I said earlier on, in terms of secondary school, there were more Asians there. And so
Mm.
I felt a lot more comfortable with sort of, sharing and just being comfortable with the fact that I am different and I have this other
Wow.
background, and, just sharing that with those that were otherwise different in that respect. So not shying away from it anymore, just being sort of comfortable with it is what it is. And not sort of thinking too much about it.
Brilliant. That's really quite very, very powerful and very helpful to everybody, because there could be children. We've got an audience from as young as 11 years old who could be having this duality and tussling with it. So it's evidence that a person of your sort of caliber has been through these sort of journeys in life, but has also has achieved as you have, and we'll get to talk about that later on in the second half of this interview. I'm also going to be very clear the fact that with these dualities, as you said a moment ago, they tend to get easier to accept, but they always tend to stay there, which is why you specifically have created the alchemic method around the alignment of self with that secondary duality. But I'm not going to pip the post there. I'm going to jump that. You stay tuned with this audience, and please listen to it a bit later. In the second half, we're going to go deep into the methodology that actual Danny has created and understood and studied, what he's amalgamated for himself. Danny, at this particular point, we tend to ask our sort of guests to share with the audience that we've always found in human life, in all of us, basically, however we've grown up and evolved and matured, that there's sometimes that one sort of kind of light bulb moment. We call it a flick of the light switch, when somebody puts the lights on in the room, that kind of thing, when you start to realize it's real. This is my life. This is the truth. This is how it's working. And this usually comes sometimes after some kind of a compression in life, or some kind of what we call adversity. I call this the defining moment in your life, something significant, a significant memory. Has this happened to you, and has it been valuable to you in any way?
Yeah, definitely. That's effectively led me to where I am today. So if I may, that background is sort of two elements that have merged together, if you like. So there was the pinnacle moment. If I may just sort of provide a bit of a backstory to that, I've always had,
Please do.
during that childhood phase, is this sort of role as being that older sibling, especially in the earlier years when it was just myself and my brother. So looking after my brother, with sort of maybe the neighbors sort of being listening in, but being sort of having to look after him whilst my mum would leave slightly earlier to attend to her shift in the factory, and my dad hadn't quite come back home yet from his factory shift. So there's a sort of a window of time where I'd have to be a lot more hands-on and sort of awake, if you like, attentive to him. That was at the age of 6.
Apologies to interrupt there. At the a tender age of 6, that just shows how much of a responsible individual that you've become in life. But I just want to touch something on there. That's not kind of like, it was the norm back then. It's not the norm right now. And we are talking 70s and 80s when you grew up. But was there always and we're not endorsing this by any means at all, that leaving your children on their own. But there was a time when, obviously, I assume then that they were working shift back to back, as you said, your parents. And as you said, there was an overlap of emptiness. But did you always have some adult kind of like in the vicinity somewhere along the line?
Oh yeah, so even when we were sort of left there, by my neighbour would be alerted or informed, and they would typically sort of be checking in. So there was someone still there, at least checking in. So, but essentially, physically, I did have this feeling of like, okay, it's me and my brother, so I've got to kind of just make sure he's okay, I'm okay, and we just sort of don't sort of get into any sort of mischief or anything like that. And yeah, that kind of role has played through. My brother, unfortunately, developed, ended up having type 1 diabetes at an early age. At his age of, I think he was 6 back then when he was first diagnosed. And that meant also then I didn't do it frequently, but there were enough moments where I would actually get involved with, and back then, sort of drawing insulin. You had to sort of do it quite manually. You've got the sort of fancy Novo pen these days with a really fine needle, and it's all seamless. There's already pre-mixed insulin, but back then you had to sort of draw the fast-acting insulin and the slow-acting insulin, and then you sort of tap the syringe to get rid of the air pockets, and then actually deliver the injection as well into my brother's thigh or whatever. And I was sort of doing that from time to time as well. So all of that really sort of helped to reinforce or define that kind of role I carried on playing in terms of being a bit more responsible, hands-on, involved, and just having this innate desire to want to keep involving myself in other people's problems, trying to I just needed to fix problems or
nurture
make
them,
sure there were no problems in the first place.
Yeah, to nurture and be the solution. Is that the kind of feeling?
Indeed, yes. So I kind of had that innate desire, and whatever then my professional role became in the banking industry, where it was very much about compliancy, making sure sort of banking systems were compliant and all of that good stuff. But I was in a project environment where I was working with other people, I was supporting people. There were managers that obviously supported me. So I played a coaching role, if you like, back then without realizing it was a coaching role. Mm-hmm. And that kind of continued for many, many years and became just something that became just me. And it was only, unfortunately, about a decade ago that my dad's younger brother, so that's my chachaji, the Punjabi term for that relationship, his younger brother, his son got into a bit of trouble, and that meant that my uncle kind of took it upon himself to burden himself with the blame and the guilt and the shame from that incident. And I, from a sort of a specific relationship with my uncle, had a real close bond and looked at him as a role model. What I spent my when I was 16, between GCSEs and A levels, I spent 2 months out there on my own. I went to India, and I spent a good 2 months. And my uncle, my chachaji, just took me everywhere. He was my companion. Really deepened a bond I already had with him from previous visits, and he took me to different places, like Anandpur Sahib, which is a key Gurdwara in India, in Punjab.
For the Sikhs, yes.
And everywhere else, sort of, which was significant enough that we could fit within that 2 month period. So I sort of had really got to understand this guy, physically very strong and fit, mentally, emotionally very switched on, jovial, high spirited. And I could see he spent the entire 2 months with me. He had everything. His farming operation was sort of all in hand. He had people sort of that he was managing and ensuring it was all on top of where it needed to be. So very organized. And the last person that I would have thought would then end up, because of this one incident, that he would sort of take on the blame and the guilt and go down this, what became a downward spiral, unfortunately. So
can I just touch a little bit of information on there? So your uncle, which is your dad's younger brother, obviously you at the tender age of 16, which is quite an influential time in your life, took some time out, and you already were this responsible individual, for the audience just to understand, and taking charge of your brother, a semi-parental role as well, and then evolving that. This is obviously pre you picking up your actual journey in life and your career within the white collar environment of being a compliant individual and a high-end, high net worth assistant. Can I say that it's very clear that you said that your uncle was your role model, and our heart goes very, very strongly out to, I stand in support of all the Punjab farmers, which are currently being, I suppose, deregularized and slightly exploited, which is definitely a big thing. And also we are in December in 2020, and there's a big challenge. So I want to bring some air to that to that as well. And the fact that we both sort of come from a background of farming, and in specific, your uncle. So I just want to add a bit of air of understanding here, that you mentioned something specifically there, Danny, which was really important to bring light to, is that when we think of farmers in third world country, let's say India, which is very, very wealthy, we assume a very backward thinking and culture. You also said that he was very organized. So would you mind just touching a little bit light on that as well? Because you said that he dedicated his time for 2 months with you. How did his business run then?
Yeah, so I was very observant of him, having the conversations with the laborers. There'd be a head laborer that he would just make sure that he'd be checking in regularly, making sure that, obviously with farming, it's very seasonal. You've got to sort of be on top of, the timing of harvesting or seeding, the watering, etc., the whole sort of full process, end-to-end cycle. So he's obviously having to sort of do that on a date, and obviously with the weather constantly changing, having to sort of just keep adjusting slightly. So I just saw how switched on he was, and understandably, obviously he's picked that up. My grandfather was obviously always very much on top of that and continued to remain very heavily involved. Even to this day, he's still in his 80s now. Well, no, he turned 90 this year, my grandfather.
God bless.
So
God bless. Please do share your granddad and Babaji's name, please, because we might as well give him the glory of being here for 90 years of his life.
Sure. So he's Danny Sangha, and he's my granddad. I'm very proud of him. He sort of has lots of stories to tell. I'll be speaking for hours for all the sort of great stuff, and I just love how he comes out with some wonderful proverbs from time to time, because he was schooled back in the sort of pre-40s. Urdu and English is what was taught in the schools.
Urdu was a language, and English, obviously, at the time. Yes.
That's it. Yeah. So he actually can't speak. Oh, I'm sorry. He can't actually read or write in Punjabi, but he can write very well in English and Urdu, as well as then speak Urdu, and he can speak English. His English is really good. It's just
amazing.
Sort of, and I found,
which city is this from? Where was he from?
So our local district, or the actual town, the local town is Hoshiarpur. So it's
yes.
Yeah. So it's sort of the Doaba region of Punjab,
which is near Jalandhar in specific.
That's right. Yeah.
As in Jalandhar is a big city, which is very well known, a very commercial city. And I'm just going to liken something before you continue about Granddad. I really want to know this, but my father was also schooled in Urdu, so Urdu as per se. So he actually read and wrote in Urdu and couldn't speak Punjabi, couldn't write Punjabi, but spoke it. But the language writing was in Urdu, but it was Punjabi. So he taught himself Punjabi when he moved to Delhi and Hindi and stuff of that sort of nature. It was really interesting.
Well, yeah, that's pretty much. I think again, it's the same thing, because I think with my Babaji, my grandfather, when he came to the UK, I noticed that he was basically writing in Urdu in terms of the lettering, but it was actually Punjabi that he was
vocalizing and
expressing. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And what's really, really inspiring is for a farmer in that period to have been literate in English as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think there's within our family a lot of so my grandfather's brothers were all sort of rooted through into the army, so they ended up having sort of roles within the Air Force and what have you. So even within that sort of environment, then English and sort of being very academic was obviously the thing to sort of make sure you're on top of or aspire towards. So you get the sort of higher ranking roles and what have you, and that sort of standing that you have effectively amongst your peers. Yeah.
And that clearly shows within you as well, purely because the fact that you are an individual who spends an ultimate time with discipline and focus and early mornings, and as I love, is a very core part of life. And that discipline's obviously fared through. You were talking very specifically about your uncle. Please do continue. As a significant change or a moment in your life, what happened? I stopped you from saying that for a moment. Let's just go back to it, if I may.
So what happened, unfortunately, because of the incident that occurred with my cousin, my uncle turned to, so first of all, for whatever reason, he assumed the guilt and the blame for the events, even though he was no way involved or had any part to play in it, if you like.
But would you agree that that's actually quite cultural for a very
Yes,
Punjabi thing and a farmer thing?
absolutely.
Very, very
I was
personal.
just about to say, yeah, because he's still, I mean, my uncle was a very high standing figure amongst his village and the surrounding villages. They were very respectful of my uncle. He was a go-to for help or for support, to the extent, never, not that I am aware of he ever needed, but if he did need to ask for a favor or call upon sort of borrowing something,
It'll
people
be there.
would just willingly just say, you know what, take that and don't worry, we know you're good for it. Just whenever you can give it back.
Wow.
That kind of stature is what he had. And that sort of level of respect for our family was quite prevalent. So I think this kind of a shocking moment that happened with my cousin, he got involved in sort of some trouble and some violence and what have you, and that unfortunately unfolded down a wrong route to sort of keep it to that sort of level of detail. But with my jaji, then he turned to alcohol, unfortunately, to almost distract himself and to channel those emotions. And almost, I guess, now I know what I know, but that was for me that the sort of scenario that triggered my understanding of how someone that I saw as a role model, who was very, very physically and mentally fit, to sort of go down that route, to the extent then that he gave up on life. So it was a gradual, slow process of effectively killing himself by gradually getting more dependent on alcohol and continuing to drink, and to the extent that he knew very well if he was to continue, he was already told he would have X sort of months of life left, and he had already given. That was an unconscious decision he'd already made to just carry on down that route. So he's no longer with us.
Very sorry to hear, and may God rest his soul in the afterlife. There's something that I've got thought that comes across here. So if anybody is aware of anybody within their life who is going through such challenges and problems where they're resorting to other substances, and that's not what we're not at all condemning or condoning anything. We're saying if you are in this situation, please reach out to your doctor. Don't take this upon shame. It is not the answer. It may seem like it right now, but Danny and myself and many of our guests are actually evidence of the fact that you should just try to give yourself that go. Life really can reboot itself. It's a very sad conversation that we've heard with Danny's uncle, who is his role model. Please, do seek help. Just look at what difference it's making upon your own family and your own life, and look to just to help. Just to talk to somebody and help, ask them for an assistance to take you further forward. Thank you very much for listening for that. Sorry, Danny, do continue.
Yeah, so that bit for me was the trigger point where I started questioning mindset and understanding why the mind would go down that route. I had this kind of preconceived idea, otherwise you've got this positive energy and you keep applying it, and you'll continue being successful and what have you. And if you do come by a hardship at any point, you'll overcome it. So it's very more superficial understanding, really. And the kind of coaching role I was already playing was still very superficial at that higher level without that deeper understanding. So that drove me to understand why does a mind sort of go down that route potentially, or why can some minds end up going down that route? So that's where my study sort of began with neurolinguistics, and sort of picking up on that science and sort of how the mind is effectively modeling the world around it.
Wow. So
and all of that sort of good stuff.
Amazing. So can I just ask a question then? So neurolinguistics programming, neurolinguistical programming, which is NLP. I know you're a qualified master practitioner of that, but my question to yourself is that the challenge that with your uncle, you took it obviously as a big blow to your soul and to yourself, but it actually, you turned it around and drove it toward the drive to dig deep and understand what actually happened, because this gentleman, your uncle, was actually your role model. This is very, very, very deep, and I think this is beautiful and a great message for everybody. If you've just joined us, please, we're in episode 70 of the Empower Hour show with Danny Sangha, who is a confidence and alignment coach, and also a white collar worker as well, very, very high end, high net worth individual worker. Please just scrub back and understand his journey, how he's managed dualities, and also how he's affected by his role model, who sadly is no longer with us, but how he used it as a positive in his life instead of driving him down in the dump. So thank you very much for joining us. So welcome back, everybody. With yourself, Danny. So my question to yourself is that you started neurolinguistics, and the feedback or the feed or the seed for it was to understand what goes on in the mind, in the brain. Is that right or is that wrong?
No, absolutely. That's exactly what it was. Because up until that point, especially with alcoholism, I just had this very basic, simplistic view that you develop a taste for it, and you just gradually, continue to just drink more and more, but until a point where you become dependent upon it. But I knew that wasn't the case with my uncle. So just trying to understand and realizing that actually the alcohol was actually a vice or a channel to kind of shy away from having to deal with the internal issues that were going on. So I only know all of that now, but it was that sort of trying to connect the dots that just weren't connecting then, because that superficial and simplistic view I had just wasn't making sense in his scenario. So it's forced me to get deeper into that understanding.
How did this kind of like contention, pain, how did it evolve in your world? And how today, and obviously being involved in the scenario, you studied neurolinguistics. What else have you studied? And you are the alignment coach, the confidence coach for celebrities and people of that sort of nature. When you've worked with so many, maybe if we're lucky, we might get you to answer a few and maybe share a few names if anybody you're partnering with, in growing their organizations and stuff. But my question is, how did you drive? How did you flip that into a positive movement for yourself to where you are today?
Yeah, so definitely, I think that study itself, and I continued that, so it became sort of a more formal qualification, as you mentioned rightly there, Baji, in terms of becoming a master practitioner for neurolinguistics programming. Furthering that into sort of certifying as a life coach more formally and being accredited by the Institute of Leadership and Management, and evolving that to get to higher levels to the extent that I'm now a senior trained synergist practitioner as well, through your wonderful methodology and program. So all of that amazing wisdom, knowledge has just helped to define and shape where I want to sort of take myself forwards. And so as I've been studying these and starting to then professionally apply them, because then with what happened with my uncle gave me that sense of purpose that now I know what I know, I need to share this, and I do need to help others avoid going that route. So as I've started to study and get more knowledgeable and understanding of it, I've been able to refine my own kind of application of the help I'm providing as well. So
yes,
that's where I've got to.
That is very powerful, but I also know you, and I know that you're beyond. Okay, you thank you for mentioning the Synergist methodology, which I've written, and your practice. You also studied under the Synergist. You've studied DISC as a practitioner as well. My question to yourself is, you also flow, and you've created the Atmic method of your own. It's your own methodology that you've kind of derived from everything you are. Is that correct? So I would like to delve for our audience today, if you don't mind. Tell us a little bit about the Atmic method. I mean, for example, if I had a challenge, argument's sakes, I know you work very strongly within confidence arena and alignment. Now, for us, normal sort of thinking individuals who may be not shining that thought, can you just explain to us first, what is alignment and why is it needed? And then also what is the seed behind confidence? Why would I be affected by confidence? How do I know whether I'm even suffering from a little bit of lack of confidence? Please help us with your now.
Yeah, sure thing, Buddy. So for me, I mean, for me, that formula I've put together is clarity plus alignment is what gives you that confidence. And the confidence itself is actually something that you've already got inside you from the day you entered this world. And it's not something that we necessarily need from an external environment. We have it as a sort of ever ready vessel inside us to pour out from. It doesn't diminish in the truest sense. What does happen in terms of us losing confidence is losing access to that vessel inside us.
Mm.
It becoming sort of layered over, masked by noise, by overwhelm, by limiting beliefs that we adopt as we grow up and we start to sort of operate within environments, start to pick up on our own sort of map of the world as we see the world,
Mm.
which is, you know, not necessarily the true reality of the world. It's just our interpretation, and that starts to sort of flake away at you being able to access that vessel of confidence inside you.
That's brilliant. So I'm going to ask a question, if I can, if I may, on behalf of our audience and ourselves. So if I'm an individual, um, with that earlier duality we were talking about, with going to work, coming home, going to work, going to school, coming home, if we tend to live in that secondary duality long enough, is that accounted for as one of the sort of layers you just said, like an onion sort of thing? So does it add complexity to your, to be able to find stuff? You know, that what you said, it's kind of like it takes you away from that clarity. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's effectively that, I'd call that the misalignment that starts to occur, where you are not fully continuing to remain aligned with your true self. So my methodology, the Artemic method, very much is all about firstly getting clear, and that's
Mhm.
clear on self, your self-discovery process, which again I've incorporated amalgamation of different learnings, especially a core component of that is the synergist methodologies, in the sense of the disc psychometrics, for example, and then the DFT process as well, which is about getting really focused in your thoughts and in your tasks as well. So that is part of the methodology of
Mhm.
Artemic, where you will get clear on self, understand how you operate, how you behave, and why you behave that way. And that starts to then open up your sort of viewpoint of how other people behave and those differences, and start to see them at that deeper level,
Mhm.
to then have more empathy and understanding of those differences and work with them, as opposed to otherwise completely hitting up against those differences and sort of
But
battling with difficulties.
if I could just ask a question then. So the more we actually become, I suppose, unaware of the duality, the further away we could come from our center. And you're saying using disc, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that if I can. How does that help somebody, and why is that important for them to kind of know themselves?
Absolutely. So DISC is a psychometric profiling assessment, and it gives you a view of what your natural state is. So we all have different levels of energy or traits within us as our personality profile.
Mm-hmm.
And with the concept of DISC, some of us are sort of at one level, and none of these are right or wrong. They are just a different type of profile based on, you know, our evolution, on our own individual journeys. And so you've got D, you know, if you're a more dominant nature and an extroverted energy, through to then someone who's more very detailed and compliant, and to some extent an introverted energy. So it's just understanding where you sort of sit. And it's not that you'd be one and nothing of the other. You'll have a blend of these different elements. And it's just knowing what your one, your particular profile looks like, because that in itself unlocks a lot of issues that otherwise you might have been dealing with, from communication, because
Mm.
the actual way you approach conversation, the language, the speed of conversation, the level of detail, that all plays out with your profile. And if you've got a certain profile which is very fast paced and not so detailed, but someone else you're speaking with or conversing with is slower paced and more detailed, there's obviously that disconnect. And one thinks the other one's not
Ah.
getting it, or one just thinks the other one's too slow, or the other one thinks that, you know, they're being intimidated. That kind of disconnect starts to sort of surface.
So I get it, I got it. So that's basically an externalization of, that's basically an external version of the internal disconnect, isn't it? Right. So when you're not getting on with somebody, and they don't get you because you're not speaking the same, in essence, language or body language. And I love this. This is very, very powerful. So does that mean that we can create? I mean, can anybody create a disconnect with themselves?
Yes, that will naturally happen. It can happen to the best of us if we're not conscious and understanding, firstly, of where our true sort of identity is and what that sort of clarity looks like,
Mhm.
when it comes to understanding self. Then yeah, you can drift away from, and you will end up operating in a way which is misaligned. So that's when things tend to go wrong. If you've got, you know, a certain profile, but you keep approaching certain tasks or trying to communicate with others, and finding that those disconnects are there without knowing what your profile is, you won't necessarily understand what that disconnect is or why it's happening, and therefore be able to then sort of resolve it, whether that means you adapting yourself for the environment around you for a temporary period to deal with the situation, or to create your external environment so it's more suited to your profile. For example, the way you set your goals or the types of goals you set for yourself.
That's very similar to, is that correct in saying that's similar to kind of like right person, right job? So somebody who's, if I could just point a little bit towards the type of job you're actually doing, you could be a managing director, a salesperson, a HR person, or an admin, as in sense of the accounting, legalization. And so each one of these is the DISC principle. So you could be in the wrong job in essence, which will kind of fuel an external duality as well, wouldn't it? Yeah. So
yeah, 100%.
got it. So now, how does the Artemic, which is Artemic method, a method that you're congregating with neurolinguistics, Synergist methodology, the DFT process, etc. And obviously, we can talk about the DFT process a bit later, another time. But in this specific interview, I'd love to just share with the world, what is the Artemic process? Are there steps to it? And if so, is it something that you can share with the audience tonight?
Yeah, it's very much sort of a 3+1 approach I have. So you very much firstly start with that sort of self-awareness stage, getting a better understanding of where you are or who you are and how you operate. And then that evolves to then the second stage of getting clarity on your purpose and your values as well. And
got it.
That then moves on to getting clarity of what your personal plan would then need to also look like to sort of build on from. And then there's the element of execution of the plan, which in itself is then an evolutionary journey, because as you start to execute the plan, lots of different issues or sort of historical beliefs and other challenges or traumas from the past might then start to surface, which reveal themselves and become those blockers, which we overcome as part of that journey that we partner together on.
So those 3 steps, could you just over them again? Just give me the top liners again. What were they? Step 1 was?
So it's clarity on self. So it's self-discovery.
Self-discovery. And step 2?
So step 2 is to getting clarity on purpose and values.
Got it. Purpose and values. So when you find yourself, you can find your purpose and values. And what's the 3rd step?
And it's getting a clear plan of action.
So execution. So actually delivering something that will be valuable to you. Wow, that's really, really powerful. And you said it was a +1. So what's the +1?
The +1 is then that process that follows thereafter, where you then begin to execute the plan and you start to set specific goals. And then the process of how you meet those goals is the execution of the plan, and the alignment comes in, because now that you've got clarity on self, your values and your purpose, they will feed into then having an aligned set of goals that you first set and commit to. And then you create an alignment in terms of your path, your journey towards those goals, i.e. the plan of action.
So if I can give you for our audience, just if you don't mind, I'm sorry I'm questioning you so much, but it's such a deeply important topic and it interests me so much. So if you can give me an example of somebody who may be going through this, because somebody might be listening here and they probably don't even know they're going through these stages of misalignment. And obviously they could reach out to you. We'll cover that in a moment. But what sort of, I mean, you work with celebrities, you work with sportsmen. So can you give me an example of this kind of, and senior bankers and high net worths? What does this mean? How do you identify with this? Because I'm just feeling on behalf of my audience that how will they know that they're going through this?
Okay, so let me give you so let me give you a celebrity example without mentioning specific names, but a lot of celebrities will often have that sense of duality going on in their day-to-day. Now, often it's okay where there's a sort of a marry up of their personal psychometric and then the role they're performing on stage or on camera, expressing themselves. There's a natural alignment, but that's fine. But often where I get involved is where issues start to surface, and that is often down to the fact they've got one type of psychometric profile, and then they've thrown themselves into an environment which is requiring a different type of psychometric profile of them, which is fine if they understand that concept that there is that difference, and therefore they manage it accordingly. So without knowing that there's that disparity between the two the natural and then the adapted state, they don't otherwise necessarily deal with the challenges that otherwise will just surface because they're constantly feeling this, misaligned, essentially is what they are.
So it's kind of like doing something at home, being somebody and becoming this character, which is what you're saying with reference to celebrities. If they're a host or something, they're becoming this character on stage, and they're living the character, the adopted stage, so much that they've forgotten who the natural person is.
Exactly that. And it's not just forgetting their natural person, it's all the other issues that can start to surface around within their environment as well. So and they won't even realize that it's because of this disconnect. But the moment they realize there's that difference between the role they play in their sort of home environment or natural environment versus that adapted environment within their career, they don't really know how to do anything about it.
So what's the outcome of this? And because I can remember in our pre-call, we kind of discussed this, and you shared a really good example of a footballer, for example. How does this relate to a footballer, for example?
So with a footballer, so one core element of the methodology is to get the footballer really clear on that sense of self, which is agnostic to what otherwise they will have assumed as their identity, which is basically the footballer, which naturally you'd expect to happen. They begin that career at such an early age, typically 5, maybe 6 years of age. They don't know anything else apart from football. So if you were to sort of ask them to draw out who they are as an identity, or to break out their life components, I call it a wheel of life assessment. If you were to ask a footballer, they would pretty much, if you were to imagine a pie chart, they'd probably have a huge piece of the pie, which is their football. And then everything else is just a tiny, insignificant piece that they don't even look at.
Like relationship,
relationship, wealth, physical health naturally is okay because that's a crucial element to their success in their football. So that normally gets kept in check. But those other elements, almost like sort of passengers in a car journey, you need to keep them happy as much as you're then keeping the driver happy and sort of the overall keeping the car happy to make sure it gets you to where you need to get to.
So am I right in saying that becomes a bit lopsided? Yeah. So that's where the imbalances come. Got it.
Yeah, and with footballers especially, these statistics are, more than 55% of them are typically suffering from depression. A third of them will go through a divorce, and most of them will be bankrupt in the first few years of their retirement because of, again, just that lack of clarity on who they really are and what their sort of true 360 view of their life is actually consisting of.
Oh my goodness. So I didn't know that statistic. That was so wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that. So have I got this right? I'm hearing this, that basically, and this is not every footballer, of course, there's some who have diversified and they've obviously had some help with that. But you help people that when they've kind of like finished a career that they thought that was everything in their life, for them to actually have a balance in other areas of their life as well. So for example, enriching themselves within a home relationship, maybe having a secondary interest, or maybe a secondary investment, that kind of thing, because you said they were bankrupt and stuff. So is that correct? And that's obviously where your alignment with self comes through with the Artemic method.
100%. Yeah, the idea is to be proactive and preventative. So you want to kind of be on this journey sooner so that you have that sense of understanding of who you are, what you're about, and you can then understand that you're aligned with the way you're operating and what you're doing as you sort of progress through your journey, rather than waiting until otherwise that big piece of the pie has just disappeared. And then you're left thinking, oh no, and then that's where the depression kicks in and whatever else sort of happens.
That's what you're talking about, the identity. Now I understand. Sorry. Yes. So it's about them not having no identity, a bond beyond their current career. So this could happen with an entrepreneur, could it not? Or an elderly person as well. It's exactly the same, isn't it? So a person will be a business, and then they get to a certain age where they can't run the business anymore, or it fails or something, then they lose their identity because they've had nothing else but that, right?
100%. Yeah, they should not really being consciously aware of everything else that really truly makes up your life, from your wealth to your physical health, your mental health, to your hobbies and interests. And if some of those things aren't there, it forces you to start thinking and actually actively investing time and energy to creating those elements and ensuring then that you've got that balanced life, truly balanced life, which is not just the career, but lots of other different dimensions.
That's so beautiful. So that I've just seen now, I understand very clearly now. So I hope the audience has understood that as well, where we see, because a lot of us, a few weeks ago, we were talking about mental health on one of the Inspired shows. the Feel Good Friday shows, actually, Inspired Tribe shows. And we were speaking specifically about how mental health is deemed as a very dismissive context, like not very accepted. Mental health is seen as a negative, or as a weakness of some kind. And I'm understanding, by no means am I making it this simple, that if you have nothing else in your life added, which is what you're looking for, so finding out who you are as a person, finding out your interests, and the other balance of life, which is what you're talking about, and then putting a plan in place, that's paramount to success in life, isn't it, as a whole, as a human being, right?
Yeah, 100%, definitely. Yeah, that's exactly as you just articulated it.
Got it. Wonderful. So this brings us towards, I told you this is going to go like that, didn't I? I said,
Amazing.
we're not going to start it, it's going to disappear, we're going to get to the position. How can somebody get hold of you, Danny, if they wanted to reach out and probably even explore some of these principles that you talk about, which is the Artemic method?
So there's a couple of different channels that you can approach me via. The easiest and simplest way would be just to come through via my website and book a 30-minute session with me. It's a free consultation. It just helps us to understand one another, for me to hopefully within that half-hour window at least help in some way. And if we need to, we continue on a journey, and that's sort of the best way, a structured way. But you can contact me directly as well. I'm open to being approached directly.
Please tell us your website. You forgot to tell me your website. So what is your website? And how do you contact?
The website's dannysangha.com. So that's DANNY, Sangha, SANGHA.com. And my Instagram handle is dannysangha.official.
Perfect. So whether it's Insta?
And then you can also contact me directly. So all my contact details are on the website. So I'm happy for you to pick up the phone and reach out to me directly as well.
Thank you very much. This is wonderful. So if anybody, or anybody who's in that space, please reach out to Danny. This is not a sales pitch. This is just genuinely knowing how much of an honest person he is, self-alignment, and empowering you to create the change. This is what the Empower Hour is about. So Danny, a time has come. We call this the legacy moment. I'm going to ask you a question. We haven't recited this or rehearsed it, so I'm going to push you quite hard on this one, I'm afraid. It's a time that, in this particular case, we'd call it the epitaph moment. And as a Sikh, and many other faiths as well, you don't necessarily believe in burying. By the way, we're not condemning or condoning either. Everything is right on a personal journey. But if there was such a thing as an epitaph which said and read, and I'm not at any stage inviting this in from the universe, our time is set whenever it is. But if it said, here lies Danny Sangha, the man who, how would you end that? What would you want to be known? What was your legacy you'd leave there?
Interesting one. It would have to be the man who helped me find the confidence that I already had inside me to begin with.
Oh, wow. I understand that. Please help the audience. I mean, does that mean that we're all completing? What were you saying to that?
We enter this world, there's that concept in Sukhi, for example, of us being Sampurna. So we already come with everything we need into this world. We don't come lacking of anything. And confidence is one of those key ingredients that we already have when we start off in life. And as I mentioned before, it's just that it gets disguised or hidden over time, and we lose access to it. We don't lose confidence, we lose access to the confidence we have inside. So that's my aim, is to help individuals rediscover that confidence that they already had. They didn't even realize it was there all along. And that would sort of help solve most, if not all, of their underlying problems that they're experiencing.
That is so beautiful, because it's so deep, because of the fact that most people don't realize that we're all equal and we all are complete. And that's what you just said there. That's just beautiful. Oh, thank you very much for that. And this is about the Empower Hour. So I'm going to ask you another question. I think this has been a power-packed hour already. 50 minutes of it has gone through so quickly. But there's another question I want to bring to yourself, that there are dark moments. There's moments when people get upset. And this has been a very challenging year, the 2020, with COVID, and our heart goes out to everybody who's been affected by COVID. But a quick question, a quick answer. Is there a wisdom quote or something that gives you a pick-me-up and just realigns you as well, because to get yourself back on your feet? Is there something that is a positive quote that our audience can take away today and get a piece of Danny with?
Yeah, 100%. There's one that it just sits with me and it's ingrained in my philosophy. I've even got it as quotes in my journals that I provide as gift packs to my clients. But it's Man Jite Jag Jit, which is, if I pronounce that correctly, it's a quote from the Guru Granth Sahib. And it basically means conquer the mind and you'll conquer the world. And that's
Wow.
very much the sort of underlying theme and true sort of personal belief I have and what I wish to kind of help everybody understand and believe in.
This is beautiful. And for anybody who seeks our holy scriptures, and our living guru is the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, which is the scriptures. And what Danny just shared there is actually, surprisingly, it's a part of that, which is Man Jeet Jag Jeet. Yeah. So you win your mind, and you can win the world. That's beautiful. Wow, that's definitely with a lovely little feeling, greatness there. Danny, I'm just so surprised how much we've covered in this short period of time. And on behalf of Salam Radio and myself, Sukhi Wahiwala, and the whole of the Inspired Tribe who follow us and watch these Empower Hour shows, we thank you from our heart for being our guest on our 70th guest on episode 70. Thank you on behalf of all of us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a true honor and pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliantly, it really has for us as well. And for everybody else who's thoroughly enjoyed, please, if you've just joined us, rewind to the start of episode 70 and enjoy, because this is a live broadcast from YouTube. Then it plays the end when you join this. Please scrub it back, rewind it back if you're listening to my voice, to the start of this recording, and seriously enjoy the pearls of wisdom that have been shared by Danny Sangha, the confidence and alignment coach to celebrities. I'm just going to say, it's left me beautifully buzzing at the moment. Thank you very much once again to all of the listeners and the followers, and on behalf of Danny and myself, please support and keep supporting by subscribing. Please do comment and like if you can, and share this with other people who you know are amongst your thinking and thought process, who could benefit from some of the knowledge we share in the Empower Hour show by Salam Radio and myself, Sukhi Wahiwala. This is every single Tuesday between 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock. I sincerely looking forward to see you on episode 71 next week. Bye.